What's up, guys? It's your boy Rich here, coming at you from a galaxy not too far away. So let's talk about Star Wars, because Oris just introduced two limited edition Star Wars models, Darth Vader and Stormtroopers, but they are not available in the US. They were made exclusively and are sold exclusively in certain Asian countries, I believe Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China. So finding information on these watches, and especially the pricing, was a bit challenging. So your boy had to seek the assistance from a couple of different Oris authorized dealers. And by the way, both of those ADs had no idea that Oris introduced the Star Wars models because they were not made for the US. So they didn't have any information on this. But they were very helpful in trying to help me find the pricing on this. And I think it was also out of curiosity as well. One of them happened to be a really huge Star Wars fan. So when she heard that they made these models, she was really helpful. So let's start with the Stormtroopers, which is limited edition to just 1,300 pieces. And it is basically part of the Aquas lineup. It's 43.5 millimeters, and it uses the automatic Salida 220 movement. And the pricing on this varied greatly, anywhere from $3,500 up to $10,000, which isn't surprising considering that it is a limited edition. Considering the non-Star Wars Aquas watch starts at about $2,400 on a steel bracelet. So if we could get one for about $3,500, that isn't as outrageous, especially for it being a limited edition. But if we are going to pay $10,000 for it, that does seem kind of outrageous. But there are also a lot of Star Wars fans, a lot of them, and a lot of Oris fans. So I don't think that model, even at that price, will have any problem finding a home. Both Oris' Star Wars models are done with a lot of restraint. There aren't any obvious design cues egregiously done to represent the Star Wars brand. If we look at the Stormtroopers edition, it is very subtle. At 9 o'clock, and instead of using what it normally uses, they use a TIE fighter at 12 o'clock. And around the bezel, it is very subtle in the white and black. Other than that, on the front of the watch, there isn't anything obvious about it being a Star Wars watch. However, on the case back is where we see the branding and a lot of cool stuff that represents what Star Wars is all about. That, I think, is done really tastefully, and, you know, I like this style. I like the design cues on this a lot, the way that it was done minimally on the front versus the back. Now, let's compare Oris' Stormtroopers model versus Invictus Stormtroopers edition. Whoa! I'm hit! Rich is hit! Invictus Stormtroopers watch is 51 millimeters, and it uses Seiko's NH70 automatic movement, and is priced at just $384. So right off the bat, we know that it's at least 10% the cost of an Oris. I am not a fan of Invicta's oversized cases nor their bold designs, so I had to put that aside and just compare which brand integrated the Star Wars branding more effectively, and surprisingly, Invicta did a really tasteful job. It's not as gaudy as I might have expected. They do use the Stormtroopers on the center of the dial, but it is done with a relatively decent amount of restraint. Still, I would have to say it's Oris for the win. I think Oris did a perfect job with their design cues on the front of the watch, making it very subtle and very minimalist. And on the case back is where I agree that all of the heavy branding and the design cues should be. They also don't allow for anyone to tell us, oh, what a cute Star Wars watch. Think toy watch, because that is one of the last things we want anyone to think, is that we picked up this Star Wars watch in Walmart in the kids section, especially if we're going to spend a few $1,000s on it. Oris' Darth Vader is limited to 250 pieces. It's also part of their Pro Diver series, and it has a GMT function while also using the Salida 220 movement. And it's a big boy at 49 millimeters. And part of the problem I have with this is on their website, it just says that it's black. It doesn't specify if it's PVD or DLC. I couldn't find a price on this, even with the assistance of both Oris ADs. But at least with the Stormtroopers, we kind of sort of have an idea of probably what the asking price is going for. Invictus Darth Vader is in 52 millimeters. It uses a quartz, and it is in gunmetal, and priced at just $349. And for the same reasons as the Stormtroopers, it's Oris' Darth Vader for the win. There were several watch brands that had licensing agreements and made Star Wars watches, and one of the highest end brands was Devon, but those watches were $28,500. Seiko made 6 limited edition Star Wars watches back, I think it was in 2012, to help celebrate the 35th anniversary of Star Wars, and I thought Seiko did an exceptional job with their Star Wars watches, and one of my favorite themes was C-3PO. On average, those Star Wars watches were about $1,800, which seems kind of high for a Seiko, but considering they were a Star Wars watch, it kind of sort of makes sense. You know, I wasn't sure if I was going to do a battle royale between Oris and Seiko, because the Seiko Star Wars watches were made a few years ago, but we might as well. So how about Oris versus Seiko for the win? I still think it has to go to Oris for the win all the way around for their Star Wars watches. The popularity of the Star Wars themed watches with some of the better brands is kind of sort of surprising, but it would have been really surprising a few years ago when George Lucas still owned Star Wars. I just can't see George Lucas licensing Star Wars to these watch brands because he was always so protective of Star Wars. But he did sell Star Wars to Disney back in 2012 for a little over $4 billion, half in cash and half in stock. So I'm sure that $4 billion worth a lot more since their Disney stock has risen quite a bit since then. With Disney, it is not so surprising because they are all about cash flow. I think it was smart for Oris to make a Star Wars watch. After all, their audience are probably moviegoers. But then again, there are probably a lot of Star Wars moviegoers that would love to have a Star Wars watch from a higher end brand. I know I'm one of them. During both of my conversations with the Oris ADs, I learned that it is not possible to special order these watches because they were made in limited editions specifically for their country. So even if we went to an AD to try to locate one for us, we wouldn't be able to. I asked if these watches would eventually come to the States, the Star Wars themed watches, and they both said the strength of their sales overseas will determine whether or not Oris launches with them in the US. It is a little surprising because I don't necessarily equate the success of whatever is overseas with the US. And for example, with movies that are made in the US that typically bomb do very well overseas. So for example, Tomb Raider bombed in the US at the box office, but it made $250 million overseas. So it's not necessarily comparable, I would guess. So that is an interesting way for them to test the market with these Star Wars watches. If we don't live in those countries and we are desperate to own an Oris Star Wars watch, we might have to get creative and reach out to some of our Asian friends, not me, and be prepared to pay quite a bit above asking price, kind of sort of like the Rolex phenomenon. Thanks for joining me, and may the Force be with you. So if we compare Oris with Invicta, the Super Troopers, the Stormtroopers, Seiko made the limited editions to help celebrate the 35th anniversary of Star Wars. Well, it really was for the 35th anniversary of Star Wars.